Good evening all and welcome. Tonight I have a collection of camping stories for your listening pleasure. Thank you all also for bearing with me. My voice has taken a long while to recover, but thankfully I am now back at full capacity and hope to have 3 videos a week as normal from here on out. But for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Romania is a country where people might get kidnapped, murdered, and disappear. My parents were legitimately afraid for me and were against the idea. I had to lie and tell them that we would stay in a hotel near Kozia National Park so they would get off my back. Obviously, that's not what we did. Long story short, we had to travel from Bucharest to this park, which is around 200 kilometers or 2 hours by train. We get our immense backpacks, everything we need, and went on our way. Nothing specifically happened on the train, except for the fact that it was overly crowded, with the exception of our train compartment being vacant, which is extremely rare for a Romanian train. I get excited thinking that we have the whole compartment to ourselves. As I said, it's a very rare thing to happen, and of course, after 10 to 20 minutes, it gets occupied by a man entering our compartment, with a beautiful German Shepherd. I love all kinds of animals, cats and dogs in particular, and I usually find my way around all animals, even if those don't like people. Not this dog. This dog was otherworldly. He looked so cute, like a stuffed animal. He would listen to his owner's every single command. I was impressed. It was obvious. I start asking the man about his dog, and that would be a long and awkward trip to have in complete silence if I was just staring at it. The man was exactly like his dog, except the commands he would give his dog, no other contribution to the conversation. He told me the dog's name, which is Ucigashul, which in Romanian means the killer. It's a very weird name to give to a dog. For this particular example, we would use the English word as it doesn't really translate into Romanian for context, but I thought each to their own. I asked him why such a scary and unusual name. He replied bluntly, "This dog is trained to kill. It's the only thing he likes, and he's very good at it." Okay then. Now I personally consider that the dog will grow up to have similar personalities to their owner, and most of the time, I would judge the people with dogs on how the animals react to the world and their owner. And let me tell you guys, these two did not give off good vibes in return. I brushed everything over, thinking to myself that maybe this guy is training his dog to hunt in the woods. Then I started thinking which woods are legal to hunt in our country. While I was thinking that, the guy out of nowhere asks if we're traveling to Kozia National Park. This was surprisingly accurate, considering that the only time we mentioned this place was in the train station long before we found our seats, and far before we met this man. I thought it was weird, but again, in my country, people who travel in that direction will try and make small talk and guess where you're going. Of course, you can't just lie to keep you safe of your destination, or be honest. I chose to be honest, and I'm judging myself for that. Never be honest with strangers, or honest at all after you read this story. We confirmed that that's where we were going, and asked what else there was to see around, since he started talking about the area, and, well, considering that we knew nothing about the place, we took it all in. He told us about the woods, the vegetation, the animals we encountered, told us about a beautiful monastery right at the bottom of the mountain that we needed to climb, and advised us to visit the Lotri Shore, a waterfall, and explore the caves behind it, and try and find the local restaurant. When the guy started talking about the wilderness and nature, his eyes glowed as if he was experiencing a pleasant memory, but he also grabbed his dog's collar from the neck, squeezing it tightly. The collar made a loud click sound. What surprised me was that the dog didn't move, didn't whimper, didn't twitch, just like a stuffed animal. We reached our destination, said goodbye, and the man waves us off, and we faced against him to go on our way. I turned right back around because I wanted to ask where exactly the restaurant was, but the man nor dog were no longer there. Not just that, his luggage was gone. That creeped me out a bit, but who cares? We were too thrilled for our first camping experience. We began walking with our backpacks on, each at least 10 kilos, and we reached a tunnel that had been dug into the mountain. It looked amazing, exactly like those horror movie tunnels which, if travelled during the night, would make your hair stand on end. Lucky for me it was daytime. It wasn't a particularly long tunnel, we could see the end the whole time, but when we got to the middle, we hear a whimper in the distance. It sounded like a dog crying in desperation for its life. We stop. My boyfriend looks at me with a, "Oh no, you're not going to take that dog with us" kind of face and tries to convince me to take a different route. We don't. I hear the dog. I go right toward the sound, and in the middle of the road I see a chubby puppy with lots of white and brown circles on his butt, crying so hard, laying on the cement looking really hurt as if hit by a car. I freeze and think to myself, our trip is over. I have to save this dog. We call for him. He looks at us, pointy ears up, gets up like a doofus and starts running desperately to us. He was alone and afraid. We called him Rudolph, and he is now our camping buddy. Like 1 kilometer further, we find another puppy, probably his sister, which we dragged from a nearby river. Someone threw her into the river to kill her. All wet, cold and hungry, we of course take her too. So here we are, with 10 kilos on our backs and 2 puppies at our chest, my boyfriend with a map, and trying to find a spot to camp at for the first night. We passed by the monastery the man on the train mentioned to us, but because we had puppies we couldn't enter the building, the priests wouldn't allow it, so we walked around the property through the gardens until we reached the base of the mountain we had to climb. I'd like to mention that these puppies were 2 tiny little brats, because the second you put them down and forced them to walk on their own, they would slam their butts on the ground and cry. What a drama. We walk and walk until we decide to stop, because it was getting late, and it was starting to get cold. We found a spot next to a small landmark type of cottage in the middle of the woods. We call it Troyanica. It's like a scouting post, but for the church, where they place religious icons or a Bible and stuff like that, in order to bring good energy to the area. It belongs to the church. It wasn't like a house. It was basically a roof with 4 small walls and an opening, not a door, that you could go into, like to hide from the rain. There was an icon inside and a Bible with pages ripped from it. Curiously, I opened the Bible and was really annoyed to see that people would write down their names, like couples do on trees. But on this particular page, the words, "I will find you," stuck out written in red ink. I thought to myself that it was probably someone who just wanted to scare travelers with silly messages. I put the book back and gave it no second thought. We put up the tent, make a quick fire, unpack, make food and eat. We feed the puppies, which are now cuddled up in our tent, and finally darkness starts to rise all around us. My boyfriend kept waking up every hour, because he wanted to keep the fire alive. Now it's around midnight. We're in the tent, cuddled and warm. The puppies wake up and start to cry. I get up and unzip the tent and put them out to pee. They do it and I put them back in. They cry some more, and the smallest one begins to shiver. At the same time I hear grunting from behind the tent. My boyfriend is up too. The fire is fading, and the moment he unzips the tent and steps out, the sounds disappear into the woods. It sounded like a snake slithering through the fallen leaves on the ground, but with unimaginable speed. I ask him, was that a snake? He says, up to this day, that he cannot explain what he saw, that it was a slithery figure with feet that made a snort-like sound when the light hit it. The puppies calmed back down, and whatever it was made its way back into the woods. We tried to go back to sleep after we reignite the fire. It's 3 a.m. this time, and we try to wake up the puppies being fussy again. The fire is nearly dead. We clearly have no idea to put up a sustaining fire, we think to ourselves. My boyfriend gets up to search for firewood, and I get out too. I stare into the darkness, and I swear to God I hear whispers coming from behind the trees. I look up at the sky, and considering it's 3 a.m., and hearing birds very loudly fluttering their wings, Now, I'm no expert in birds, but aren't they usually asleep around this time? These weren't. They were very active, very vocal, and very frustrated. I look at the fire and follow the red sparks popping out of the sky, and became fascinated with something. The sparks don't seem to die. It goes on, changing colour from hellish red to green. This was very out of the ordinary for me, because it created an illusion hard to explain. It looked as if the fire sparks were going into the woods, creating a track, probably for me to follow. I kept looking after each spark to see where it burnt out, but none of them did. At that moment I began to get goosebumps on my skin, the birds being agitated, the mysterious lights pointing us to go deeper into the woods, and all the trees around us had eyes in them, like the trunks had a distinguished shape that looked like eyes. I know this is nothing paranormal, since someone explained that these shapes form when a branch is ripped from the root, and that's the shape that's left after. But there were so many. It was like I had hundreds of eyes looking at me. As I inspected my surroundings, I hear movement in one of the bushes in front of our tent, about 10 meters away from us. Obviously, I stand my ground, but don't go near it. Suddenly, a dark, bent-over silhouette comes out of it, half inside, half outside the bush, and stares at us. I call my boyfriend, and we're both like, what the hell is that? A bear? A wolf? A pig? The creature shakes its head the same way a dog does after a bath, and I hear a distinguished click like a dog collar. At this time, my boyfriend manages to light up the fire really big, which scares the animal, and it runs back into the woods, through the bush which it initially came out of. That calms us down, but not enough to ever close our eyes during that night again. Retreating back into the tent, my boyfriend falls asleep. The puppies are sound asleep, but not me. I keep the zipper on the tent opened a little, just enough to have my eyes peeking through to the bush. I think I spent a solid hour staring and falling asleep to the sight of that bush, when all of a sudden I hear a noise coming from that direction, and I immediately wake up my boyfriend, who is now peeking through a hole in complete darkness with me. What we see next still haunts my dreams. From that exact bush we see a human head popping out and looking towards our tent. Note that our peeping hole was small enough to not making look like you were being watched from inside the tent. This head is slowly coming out of the bush, skin so white I thought it was a ghost. After that, the shoulders, a full torso, and a leg. Bit by bit, an entire man, completely naked, emerges from the bush, lit by both the moon and our fire. What he did next was excruciatingly scary for me. He comes so close to our tent and begins to remove branches and rocks from our fire, basically extinguishing it by dismantling it. This all happens 2 to 3 meters from our tent. I look at the man with horror, because I recognize him, and now the clink I heard earlier from the animal is explained. It's the same man from the train with his dog too. I don't know if he followed us, I don't know if he just went the same route as us and found us and decided to stalk us, but this guy was there since midnight at least, because our fire would be dead every 2 to 3 hours, and we would be woken up by the sound of branches being cracked and rocks being moved, which we initially explained away as animals crossing the path. After he successfully managed to put out the fire, he slowly crept back into the same bush, submerging into it bit by bit, until only his head would be out, with a disfigured-looking mouth, looking like a moaning ghost. You try going to sleep after that. We didn't know what to do, so we just got back out, reignited the fire, lit ourselves some torches, and stayed near the campfire until the first rays of sun came out. I admit I did fall asleep while sitting next to the fire, and so did my boyfriend, but any sound would wake us up the moment we heard it. I was too afraid to go near that distanced bush. I did not need answers or explanations. I just wanted daylight and to get the hell out of there. And we did. We packed our stuff and got the hell out. We planned a 4-day camping trip, and this experience made us give up on the first night. It was a risk we did not intend to take. If that guy followed us or it was just a coincidence, it was enough to ruin all of it. As a conclusion to my story and advice to any first-time campers out there, never tell anyone your location or even areas remotely close to your destination to a stranger. You don't know where their minds take them and what they may end up doing. Always stay safe, always be aware of your surroundings, and any changes that come to you under the form of sound, movement, or temperature, and protect yourselves. About 8 years ago, 2 buddies and I decided to spend the night camping at Palo Duro Canyon. We're from Amarillo, Texas, so it's less than 20 miles away. This is the second largest canyon in the US next to the Grand Canyon. And while you may be wondering what kind of spooky stuff we may have run into as young kids of just 17, this isn't necessarily that kind of story. Instead, us 3 friends were some of the only around our age that we knew that didn't indulge in partying. No drinking, getting stoned, nothing of that nature. So of course we think a perfect getaway on a Friday night would be the canyon. We didn't even own camping supplies, just went to Walmart, bought some and headed out on a whim. We made the drive and get to the state park around 5 p.m. We enter the gate and set off to find a spot to pitch a few tents. We pull into the campsite area that has 2 separate canopies with picnic tables and respective grills for cooking. In the middle of both canopies, a fire pit. No one was there, so we thought it was the perfect place to set up camp. We brought some coolers with soda, some hot dogs and hamburgers to grill, and a stereo to jam some tunes while we hung out and enjoyed the last few hours of daylight in the Texas summer heat. After we pitched our tents, a truck with a small camper RV moseyed onto the site. A man and woman got out and surveyed the area. The man saw us and waved with that friendly Texan hospitality. We waved back, of course, and went about our business. We ate dinner as the sun was starting to set. I noticed that the man and woman didn't pitch a tent, and that they probably just intended on staying in their camper. We built a fire and sat around it in some portable chairs we bought, and I saw the man walking towards us. He introduced himself as Doug, and I said that he cooked a lot of extra food and if we wanted any. We politely declined and told him we'd already eaten, but appreciated the offer. He said, "Hey, as long as you guys have eaten, it's no big deal." He waved back and set back to his camp. About an hour later, he comes back with a brown paper bag and comments on the music we're listening to, saying how back in the 70s he went to all these festivals and basically just rambles about how it's awesome that we're so young and keeping classic rock alive. He notices that my friends have guitars and actually yells over to his wife to come on over. By this point we don't think anything weird of it. We just didn't know him or his wife, and he obviously was drinking and they invited themselves into our space. None of us had the spine to say anything to him, so we all just sat there around the fire trading stories as much as 3 17-year-old boys can, with a couple between their 50s or 60s. After what seemed like a lifetime of chatting with these people, he starts trying to get to a more personal level. But super polite, just a bit drunk. Asks if we have jobs or if we're still in school, and we all reply. He says he works at a United supermarket as a stocker and had done for 15 years, basically saying that if any one of us needed a job at any time, that he would put us forward and he could get us in. He says his full name for reference, just in case anyone wanted to apply. Finally, the wife starts nodding off. All liquored and bundled up, she fell asleep in her chair. Luckily, that was the cue for Doug to take her back to camp and put her to bed. When they walked back to their site, the 3 of us looked at each other and rolled our eyes because we were such doormats and basically just let this stranger come to ruin our night. We see that it's near midnight, so we decide to put the fire out and get ready for bed too. Doug trots back over to our site. He asks if we're here all weekend. We told him we only had enough money to stay for one night and that we would be heading back in the morning. He said he really enjoyed the company and that he'd personally pay for us to stay another night if we wanted to. We politely declined the offer, and he starts going back to his RV. He quickly turns back around and says, "Remember guys, if you ever need a job, just call up to United on Gem Lake Road and tell them Doug sent you." We smiled, said thank you, and he left for good. That night actually got considerably more cold, and we decided to pack up and head back to our warm beds in town at around 4 a.m. As we were leaving the canyon, we almost hit a deer and veered off the road. Everyone was okay, but we were definitely shocked because it was late, and we had gotten no sleep at that point. Us almost hitting the deer was practically the climax of our camping trip in the canyon, and we all continued back to school on Monday as normal. One of my friends that was with me on the camping trip was actually in my third class period on Monday, and we started talking about how that guy Doug and his wife were pretty cool despite not taking the hint that we didn't care to hang out with them. I asked my buddy if he could remember Doug's last name, so we googled him. Mistake. Guess who was registered over 10 times on the sex offenders list? It was Doug. All his victims were boys between the ages of 12 and 17. This rocked our world. We had somehow just barely escaped the clutches of this pedophile. What would have happened to us if we took his offer to stay another night? Well, it was suspicious of this dude and couldn't get the scenario out of my mind, so I decided to call United Supermarket to tell the manager that one of his employees was being really creepy to us kids and that he might want to be wary of the people he hires. And guess what? Nobody by Doug's name had ever worked for United. He just lied to us all night long, trying to get us drunk to do God knows what to us innocent kids. Be careful who you talk to. My boyfriend and I camped through California, and we stayed at a campsite near Santa Barbara for 2 nights. The first night it was just us and another camper across from us, and the second night it was only us at the campgrounds. There wasn't much near this campground, and it was about a 30-minute drive into Santa Barbara. It had started raining around 2 a.m., which woke me up a little bit, and I was just lying there trying to get back to sleep. I was almost asleep when I heard what sounded like a car crash. I laid there for a second and then decided to ask my boyfriend if he was awake. He answered, so I asked him if he just heard what I heard. He said he had, and we decided to go check it out and make sure they were okay. We get out of the tent and grabbed the flashlight and started walking where we thought we heard the wreck happen. When this person hops back in their truck, turns their lights on and frantically leaves the campground. This freaks my boyfriend and I out because this person was driving the wrong way through the campground with his headlights on towards our campsite, and we were the only ones there. The campground was lined with large rocks, and that is what he ran into. The fact that he was creeping right through the campground like this makes me and my boyfriend believe that he was there with bad intentions, and we slept poorly for the rest of the night. For context, both me and my friend are reasonably scrawny teenage girls. We were camping, and it was very foggy outside, and it was like mid-evening. So my friend and I were hanging out at the beach, looking at all the sandcastles from the competition that took place earlier that day, and we had to use the bathroom and wash the sand off our feet. So we were washing her feet, and I was going to the bathroom, and I heard the distinct sound of keys jangling. So after I got out of the bathroom, my friend was waiting for me just outside, and I asked her if she'd seen anyone leave the bathroom, but she had just gotten there apparently. We were standing around when I heard the noise of keys again. I looked up and saw a man. He was in his mid to late 20s, early 30s at latest. He had extremely greasy blonde hair, sunken eyes, and a hoodie with the hood up. Overall, a pretty sketchy looking dude. He circled the bathrooms me and my friend were standing by a few times after that, but he was always watching us whenever we were in view, which I took note of. My friend still didn't notice though. A minute or two later, she asked me if I wanted to go sit at a picnic table with her, and I accepted because I wanted to get away from him. So we walked over to the table, but he followed us, and I know because of his key. We sat at the table, and she was talking to her boyfriend on Snapchat, and I was reading over her shoulder as I normally do. But while I was reading with her, I told her that the guy was watching us, and about what I noticed before we went to the table. As I was telling her about it, I felt like I was being watched, so I looked over and made direct eye contact with the guy who had the keys. After we both gave him an awkward smile, he broke eye contact and walked to another man who I didn't get a good look at. They kept looking at my friend and I, so we got up and walked over to the little playground near where we were, and we just kind of talked, but this time she was paying attention to where the guys were. Not even a minute later, the two men walked by over a small patch of woods that had a red car parked near it. Due to where I was sitting, I couldn't see the men anymore, but my friend could, and she said that the blonde one kept peeking back at us from behind a tree, and the other one was out of sight. So we decided to use this to our advantage as we ran over to the little restaurant type thing, which gave us a clear view of them and a clear view of us. The blonde guy got into the car with who we believed to be the other guy. Now our fight or flight was kicking in, and we both chose flight. So we went behind the restaurant, which was closed and had been so for about an hour, ran down the stairs behind a transport truck that had been there since earlier. My friend and I looked out from behind the truck and saw the car from earlier circling around the area. So as soon as it was out of sight, we ran as fast as we could, and thankfully there were other people around, so we calmed down, knowing that the guys probably wouldn't come for us with other people there. We made it back to our campsite safely and watched movies and stuff before we went to bed. And we didn't see the guys for the rest of the trip. Now I know that probably wasn't the scariest encounter out there, but it left us shaken to the core, because who knows what would have happened if I wasn't always hyper aware of my surroundings. About 10 years ago, there were 4 of us walking through the woods local to us. To get to the best entrance to the woods, you have to walk through a crematorium. There was me, Thomas, Lisa, and Alice, and we had all planned to go camping in the woods. We had been camping in these woods on many occasions, and I had a very easygoing mum, so the parents of the other 3 would call my mum to ask if we were having a sleepover at my house. My mum, being so nice, said we could. We were all 13 at the time. We were walking through the woods to where we normally camped, and on the way, we walked past a man with an axe. He didn't speak, just stared us out. We walked on and brushed it off. That night went on as you would expect. Having fun, trying to drink and not be sick, and just have a laugh with friends. We went in the woods to sleep at around 3 a.m. About 20 minutes later, we heard what sounded like trees being axed down. The sound echoed around the woods and made us all alert. This went on for about 5 minutes, and then as soon as it started, Thomas joked about the man with an axe, and Alice got rather upset with him. Time had passed, and as we were just about to sleep, we heard footsteps approaching. They were circling around our tent. We all sat up in shock and began to panic. We heard logs of wood being dropped outside the tent. We could feel the wood as it struck the floor, and we gained the courage to look out of the tent as we peered out. He was there, sat on the floor, staring into the tent as we opened it. We all bailed and ran as fast as we could from the woods. All this time we never heard him talk. 10 years on, none of us have stepped into those woods again. Me and some of my good friends were going to hike in 5 miles on a Friday, fish an inaccessible section of the river for a state record, and hike out on Sunday. I say it's inaccessible because the whole river gets pushed into a canyon for 3 miles, and the only way you can fish in it is stay in the water, occasionally swimming between holes. Well, something happened, and they couldn't come down till Saturday morning. I hiked in, made sure the trail was well marked for them, and set up camp in the afternoon, and took off for the river to catch supper. I fished a few holes below camp to catch supper, and ended up catching 4 over 20 inch. I cooked them up in a frying pan, and kept hidden back there, and the sky started clouding up. Long black rolling clouds with a touch of green. I double-checked my tarps, dug a shallow ditch around my camp, and made sure my tarp was hung well over the fire, and then it came all of a sudden. It was blowing sideways. But I didn't worry. I knew how to build a strong shelter. I broke out the bottle of bourbon, I rolled it in the center of my bedroll and leaned back in my hammock and watched it just pour it down. The lightning was constant, and it started cracking all around me. I had a good view as twilight was starting off the tracks off the river. With a boom, I watched lightning strike the track and run right up the trail for 50 yards. I took a few long drinks out of the bottle and dozed off as the storm calmed. I awoke to the steady dripping of rain falling off the timber. The fire had died down to just a glow of hot coals, and I didn't set my lantern out in the rain. I dug into the pocket of my hammock for my flashlight. I had the sense to put my pistol and my flashlight in before I dozed off in my hammock. As I was rolling out of my hammock, I heard a sound in front of me within 15 yards, and then a squeal to my right, and a growl and a purr. As soon as I heard it all around me, the hair started standing up on my neck, and I couldn't place what kind of creature made all these sounds, or could it be numerous? I sat real still, waiting on a moment for whatever it was to stop, so that I could spot it with my flashlight and gun. I turned on my light, and saw eyes through the sight of my gun, eyes about half a foot, setting on the moss, squalling, and I smiled. In my buzzed, sleepy state, I had left the remainder of my fish setting in the skillet on the rocks beside the fire, and a whole family of raccoons had sniffed them out. It took a few minutes to stoke the fire up with some dry pine, took the skillet full of fish and just threw them out of sight from the light of the campfire. With one loud clack, the mama called the little ones out to eat. The fire kept them scared to come any closer, but they must have been hungry, and I dozed back off into the hammock. The next morning I woke up and walked to where I had thrown the fish. They had cleaned up every bone, every drop of grease, and moved on with full bellies. A few years back, I went camping with two buddies in the mountains near Lake Tahoe. We hiked about 2 hours with our packs to a small lake and set up camp. All was normal during the day. We made some hot dogs and beans and then stayed up till it was dark and watched the stars. Once it was dark out, we hiked up to the top of a large boulder to get to a vantage point to see the stars over the trees. I recall that there was no moon out that night because we could see the stars so clearly due to the limited ambient light. And so, we're pretty far out there, and there's no background noise / light from humans. Once our eyes adjusted, after half an hour or so, we could see all of the stars and even some satellites slowly moving in the sky. So after we'd done stargazing, we head down to our tents set up right by the lake. We have two two-person tents for the three of us. My two friends shared one tent, and I was alone in the other one. We set up the tents right next to each other in the same flat spot. I fall asleep pretty easily because I was tired from hiking and exploring all day and because it was so dark. However, it's about 3 or 4 a.m. when I wake up to a rustling on outside of my tent. In my half-asleep daze, I'm not sure if it was just wind or something else, I kept listening and realized that it was something brushing against my tent, and it sounded like animals pushing its nose against the fabric in the tent and sniffing. The sound was coming from the side of my tent right next to my head, so I can hear it super clearly. At this point my heart is racing, and I'm lying frozen in my sleeping bag hoping that whatever is outside will leave my tent and it'll be over. I think about calling out to my friends in their tent. I don't want to startle / anger whatever is outside, so I decide to just keep lying still and hoping it will leave. My mind is going through every possibility, and then I finally realize what it is. When we had set up our tent earlier in day, there wasn't much flat space, so we placed our tents very close to each other. Evidently they were closer than when my friend was moving his feet in his sleeping bag. They brushed up against his tent, which was right near my head. So all along it was my friend's feet moving around and there was no animal or person outside. However, the weird stuff doesn't stop there, and I only realized this next part was weird once we had left the next day and I'd gone home. As I lay in my tent and tried to slow my heart after realizing the rustling was my friend, I was looking at the shadows of the trees on the wall of the tent. They reminded me of as a kid, when a car would slowly drive down your street and the headlights through the blinds would cast a shadow that slowly drew across your ceiling. At the time it made sense to me, and I thought it was just like when I was a kid. Considering I had just thought a creature was outside my tent, this seemed like nothing. However, as I mentioned earlier, it was a moonless and dark night. So what could that light have been? It was a very slow drawing light that had the shadows of the trees moving slowly across my tent wall for about 5 minutes. We were far from civilization, so there's no way it was a car or flashlight from a midnight hiker because the light was steady and slow moving. Could it have been a flare in the sky? A comet perhaps? I still don't know what it could have been, but I only realized after I had gotten home and left the campsite. My partner was at a bachelorette party at a campground. She is a 22-year-old female. I was not invited for reasons of being male. The audacity, I know, but I stayed up late in case anything happened. She called me at midnight, panicked, saying he was just in here, and I had her recount everything after taking a few breaths. This is her story. After a fun day and night of drinking, playing games, hiking and swimming, they decide to call it a night. We will call my partner Mindy for anonymity. Well, Mindy decided to finally take a shower after everyone else was turning in and walked to the camp bathrooms. She noticed an older white male sitting on a bench, but he doesn't pay her any mind, listening to something on his phone. She assumed that he was waiting for someone or just sitting on a bench at night, as the campgrounds are full of strangers. It's one of the kind of showers where you need to push the button to get the water to go. So her shower was very short, and she had brought her clothes, so she got dressed too. She heard someone else and assumed another person needed to use the shower, and as she opened the curtain, she saw the man peeking into the shower stalls one at a time. She was the only person in there, and all she could do was stand there, mouth agape, staring at the man. He realized someone was standing there, and when he saw her, his eyes got super wide and he sprinted away. I told her that the ranger or camp staff should be nearby and to let them know immediately, or the police, but since she was at someone else's celebration, she didn't want to disturb anything. I figured there was some shock and didn't want to raise her anxiety by arguing. Still, neither of us slept that night, as I waited for her call and she waited for a man to break into her tent. She tells the rangers the next morning, and they say, "We've gotten several reports yesterday about this man, but no one can seem to find him," flabbergasted that the man had once again caused discomfort. It seems to me that he was trying to muster courage to potentially do something worse, and it was a whole day of stalking, hiding and watching and waiting, sneaking into shower stalls, but that he was still timid. I'm just glad she came home safely, as I really wish I were there to have given the guy a piece of my mind. I'm a 27-year-old female, and I went backpacking alone over the recent long weekend, which was beautiful. The second night, I camped at a beautiful high-elevation lake, which could also be accessed by a short 1-mile trail, so there were a few other campers and several people who were just day hiking or fishing. It was late afternoon, and I was sitting around my camp reading, when a guy in his mid-20s walked by carrying a fishing pole and a small cooler. I didn't think much of it, but 5 to 10 minutes later, he doubled back and came to say hi. I said hi and went back to reading. But then without warning, he then sat down on a stump next to me. I was completely taken aback at this invasion of my space, and he started asking me questions that were really just statements, but in a creepy, amused tone like, "So you're just reading?" And then looked behind me and noticed my tent and said, "Oh, you're staying the night here alone, huh?" I didn't say anything in response to this in particular, but it's obvious that I am. It's hard to explain, but his vibe was really off. I was so uncomfortable that I really couldn't form words or tell him I was trying to be alone and to leave. I was honestly paralyzed. His eyes were so dead and dark and just drilling into me. I just responded with like, "Uh-huh," or "Yep," or something to just try and pretend I was still reading. Without warning, he pulls out and cracks a beer and lights a cigarette and just starts blowing it at me. At this point, I'm so uncomfortable and just not responding. Soon after, another hiker wanders by, and he strikes up a conversation with him, and I took the opportunity to grab my water filter and bladder and pretend I needed to go get water. I went to the shore, filtered some water super slowly, and saw him walk away and go sit with the new guy, which made me relieved, except that he kept looking in my direction. I came back eventually and got inside my tent, and for about 20 minutes everything was fine. I had the rainfly pulled back and was watching the sunset and loosely organizing my things when he popped out from behind my tent and stood maybe 1 foot from my door looking down at me. He didn't even say anything. He was just staring and began laughing very creepily. I asked him what, and his response was, "This is just really funny." I felt sick to my stomach and finally responded with, "I'm taking a nap now. Have a good night." He laughed again and left. Later I saw him wandering around camp with no real purpose, still looking in my direction often. I had no service, but I wrote down his last name, at least what was written on his cooler, and where he said he was from while talking to the other hikers in my notes app, just in case, and slept with a pocket knife close. I debated leaving camp that night, but ended up staying and just leaving super early in the morning, in case he came back. Normally, while backpacking, I think the worst thing that could happen is that I might run into a bear or sprain an ankle, and maybe this seems not as bad as you reading it, but this truly was the most unsettling experience I've ever had in the backcountry. I'm sure I'll be back out soon, but hopefully it'll be somewhere far away from this dude. We had the nice idea of camping on the beach instead of going to a hotel, since I always wanted to sleep and hear the waves hitting the shore, see the night sky whenever I wanted, and just to live the experience at least once in my life. We were supposed to stay in our tent for a week. The area had public restrooms with showers and restaurants, so the matter of hygiene and hunger were not an issue. We brought all the supplies we needed for such an adventure: a 2-person tent, which was blacked out, an inflatable mattress, first aid kit, lanterns for the tent, etc. The first night were no issue. We actually enjoyed every moment of it. We would always take all our valuables with us in a backpack, in case anything bad would happen to our tent: phones, chargers, wallets, etc. We weren't the only people that camped in the area. There were plenty of people that would camp there, either single people, couples, or even families, which included even people that behaved badly. When night came, you would occasionally hear people laughing, partying, dancing, listening to music, or smoking, taking drugs, or drinking copious amounts of alcohol. We didn't mind, as nobody had bothered anyone for the past 4 days. People were having fun, and they knew best, and no one was being aggressive at that point. But one night we stayed out later than normal, around 1 a.m, and just wandering around the lively streets to listen to street performers eating out and such. When we stopped at one of such street performers who seemed to have a lot of people circling him and listening to his music, when we realized he wasn't the main character the people were gathered for. In the middle of the crowded street, where cars would occasionally pass by, was a middle-aged woman dancing completely naked, clearly affected by the abuse of alcohol and or drugs. She was incoherent. She would randomly flirt with people and would expose herself while dancing to the music, despite the disgust of the musician and the passers-by. We didn't look much into it, and decided to leave back to our tent and just have a drink in silence while watching the stars and fall asleep to the sounds of the ocean. While drinking ourselves, we hear some ladies shouting in the distance. It's the same woman we had seen before, but she was not alone. She had friends with her, 2 women and 2 men. They had set up camp on the same beach as us, a few tents further away, but not far enough so that we couldn't see nor hear them, even if it was dark. They lit a fire on the beach and continued to drink, smoke, and dance all around it. She, of course, was still naked, but this time she was wearing a see-through skirt. She goes in the ocean for what seems like an eternity, and I remember thinking to myself, how isn't she cold? The water must have been freezing. My boyfriend just shrugged it off and told me not to be bothered. If we don't engage with her, then they wouldn't annoy us. So I did as I was told, but even so, I always felt like I was being watched. I put my thoughts aside and just decided to go to sleep. But being a beautiful night and the air warm, we thought of not closing the tent completely, just zip the mosquito cover so the air would circulate inside the tent and have the sun shine in the morning to wake us up early. I didn't recall how long I'd been sleeping for, but I remember being awoken by footsteps circling around our tent and a womanly voice humming a song softly. The tent was not very thick. You could hear everything outside of it. I was too afraid to look out. Heck, I was too afraid to even change my position as to not indicate to the outsider that I noticed their presence. All I did was lay down and look outside through the mosquito cover. All of a sudden I hear the footsteps stop above my head and the voice whisper, "Don't be afraid. I only want to sing you a lullaby." And the footsteps began again to circle the tent. I see her feet in front of the tent pass by, noticing the very familiar long see-through skirt blowing behind her. Next morning, we packed our tent and moved to a different area of the beach, further away from that woman and her friends. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening to tonight's video. I do hope that you enjoyed it. It really does mean the world to me that you guys came back for the shorter stories, and thank you for your patience. It's been hard. I don't think I've had a throat infection last so long or be so painful as well. I'd never taken penicillin before either. That was a fun antibiotic, but I'm good now, all good. I'm not gonna lie, my disappointment in the NHS is slightly there, but ultimately, you know, the medicine worked its magic. So I'm happy. Thanks guys for sticking around, seriously, it means a lot. I know the compilations, if you've been here a long time, you may remember some of the stories, so I'm sorry about that. But yeah, fresh content now. We're all good. I hope you guys have been having a nice summer, and I'd like to extend a huge thank you as well to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen right now. Thank you guys, honestly. Hope to see you again in around 2 days' time with another video. But until then, stay safe, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. More content on screen now if you want it.